Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification class. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. And once again, welcome to all of you that are watching online from countries around the world. Welcome, and once again, please feel free to use our books we have there online. Just a reminder to everyone that is watching online to download those books. Once again, free of charge. You can download all of them now in the drop-down menu there on our Facebook page, Official Peaceful Solution. And once you download them, you put them in your file and you have searchable text. You actually have a way to search through everything. They being PDF files, you just hit Control F. And if you're familiar with working with PDF files, you can search for everything. You can just search a topic and it will pull them up book by book. So please download those. They're all teacher's manuals. And once again, for all of those that are in the auditorium or those that are watching online, you can email us or just message us and let us know, and we'll be more than glad to get those PDFs to you. But anyone can download them off Facebook. I know some people don't have Facebook accounts, so if you're watching on a different app or our website, then once again, just feel free to let us know, and we'll be more than glad to get those to you. We're going to be picking up in the responsibility unit again tonight. If you turn over to Lesson Plan 7, page D, we're still in Procedure 7, and of course we talked about terrorism last week, and we were building off of what William brought about earthquakes the class before. And of course, all of these things that can come unexpected, some of them are caused by man, some of them are caused as a reaction because of man. For every action there is a reaction. I should say mankind, because everyone deserves credit in this when we do things that tear down our society or our world. We all play a part in this. And here on LP7, page D, in Procedure 7, once again it said, inform students that terrorism, a man-made disaster, can also result in catastrophic loss of life and property. Explain that terrorism is a result of hate, aggression, and violence. Emphasize that hate and aggression are negative character traits that can be controlled if we learn to be morally responsible to others. Have students turn to page 144 through 145 and read the section entitled Terrorism. And that's what we did last class. And then you notice here it says assign pages 147 for homework. Tell students that one form of terrorism is called germ or biological warfare. Have students take turns reading Germ Warfare, found on pages 148 to 149. Emphasize that terrorism in any form demonstrates a lack of moral responsibility toward others. So looking back over, I got a fly up here with me that don't want to leave me alone. Turning over to page 145, because we're going to pick up with a few tips in mind after we talked about terrorism. And of course, terrorism was defined there on page 144 as the use of violence or the threat of violence to create a climate of fear in a given population. And remember what a society is and what makes up a society. Of course, when you have a society that is moral, it's governed by a common body of rules that keep it safe. And those rules are rules that do not bring harm to yourself, someone else, or in the environment. So obvious, what we read here for terrorism is very negative. And of course, a few tips to keep in mind. We talked about the World Trade Center, and it was giving us advice on what we should do if we're ever in an area or involved in something like this. And we do have Peaceful Solution teachers that were actually right at the World Trade Center when it took place or lived close to it. We have here in our city of Abilene, I think we have about 5 or 6 teachers that were there that day. They either seen it or were right at it. One of our teachers actually worked in the World Trade Center and hadn't went to work yet. So they're familiar with this. And of course, it was very traumatic living there and watching those buildings fall, watching the skyline change overnight and so forth, because they had become a very important part of the skyline there. Very strong statement in the skyline. But it says a few tips to keep in mind. If there is an explosion, brace yourself against a desk or sturdy table. Exit the building as soon as possible. Do not use the elevators. And you'll see warning signs on all of that. Anytime you take an elevator, it'll tell you, in case of emergency, do not use. And then over to page 146, it says, if there is smoke, drop down to the floor and crawl. Cover your nose and mouth with a wet cloth if possible. If you do not have a wet cloth, several layers of material will do. This will act as a filter to keep smoke and dust from choking you. Once again, the moisture there helps control it as you're breathing it in. Trying to get as much oxygen as you can. That's why you're low down on the floor, because it rises. And of course, we have Peaceful Solution teachers that are very rehearsed in what to do in case of a fire. And they can tell you, they've been trained in these things. They can kind of give you a better idea, even down to this is the reasons why. Because it's very sophisticated in some things, different fires, different chemicals, different reactions. But of course, you always want to make sure you're getting low as the smoke rises. But notice it says, if you or someone else catches on fire, do not run. Instead, stop, drop, and roll. You want to stop the oxygen from feeding the flames. Of course, if you're familiar with fires, if you can shut off the oxygen, the heat, or the fuel source, you can stop the flame. That's the whole key to extinguishing a fire. And then continuing on, it says, if you are trapped in debris, never light a match, cigarette lighter, or candle. Broken gas lines could cause an explosion. And we've seen that. If you've never seen that before, Google it or go to YouTube. It is amazing how many houses explode. And I've seen it a lot in the news. It's been a lot in the news in the last few months, actually. Houses that explode from gas leaks. And I mean huge explosions where it affected many houses and neighborhoods. So this is not something you read and it's like, that never takes place. It's all over the news and it's pretty common. Sadly, it's common, even here in the United States, where we're supposed to be a superpower, a nation of development, and technology. Well, it's taking place here, and it does take place other countries too. In fact, there's some countries I go to, and I thought it was really unique. They have a gas valve when you use a stove in a certain country. There's a gas valve on the wall, and you have to turn the gas valve on the wall, and then you can turn your stove on. And then when you get done, you turn the gas valve back off. And the same thing for the hot water heater, if they have one. This place does, and it's a very small tankless hot water heater. Anytime you use the gas, you have to turn the valves on. And of course, they practice turning them back off because they have leaks. And a lot of people there will suffer from carbon dioxide poisoning or monoxide poisoning. Continuing on here, it says, try not to move around too much. Excessive movement can stir up dust, causing you and others to choke. Tap on pipes or walls so that rescuers can hear where you are. Shouting can cause the initiation of dangerous dust, or inhalation of dangerous dust. So once again, be careful how you're doing and how you're breathing and what you're doing, and I know that we used to have a teacher, he's passed away since, but he was a really great teacher that was raised in New York. And he almost his whole life, he was an asbestos remover. And that's what he did. And he was telling me how horrible, and all the precautions they had to do to remove this stuff, and how horrible a job it was. And how a lot of the people he worked with, they all suffered from certain effects because people didn't really take it too seriously, or they didn't really understand how bad it was dealing with that stuff to begin with. But he said, when some of these buildings were demolished, nobody even thought about it, and this stuff just went floating everywhere. And then they finally started getting it where you had to remove it, and then you could demolish the buildings. But, there were a lot of things that were created that we kind of brought on ourselves. But here on page 147, once again, it says, be alert. Be alert when you're in public areas. Take notice of packages or backpacks or other bags that appear to be abandoned, especially on buses, trains, or wherever large groups of people are gathered, such as parades or ball games. And of course, you've seen that in the Boston bombings. We've seen that take place up in Illinois with parades that took place. If you go into an airport, that is probably the quickest place that you'll get someone on you if you leave your bag sitting around. That's why a lot of these people like to go to the Admiral Club or to the American Express Club or to the Capital One Club, because there you can leave your bag and no one says a word to you because you have to have membership to get in. But man, you leave that thing laying around anywhere else, it's going to disappear, and you're not going to get your stuff back unless you go through a lot of trouble to get it because of the fear of these bags being left around. And keep in mind, all of those bags were supposed to be scanned by machines. But there's still a fear that someone can get something in because, once again, terrorism. It puts a fear into the population. You know, if you used to fly before September the 11th, 2001, and then you fly today, you see the enormous difference of what it's like. It used to be you go to the counter, get your ticket, and then go find your gate and board your plane. Not that way anymore. In fact, different airports do different things, very different things. And they're all in the United States, but they'll do very different things. And it's very interesting how well these things are implemented. And I do give the people that do those jobs, they do, if you ever come back in and you have to deal with TSA, especially if you come back in the country at 5 o'clock in the morning, there's nobody going to wake you up faster than a TSA agent who's going to yell at you like the top of their lungs. You know, and there was one time I asked one, I said, can I ask you guys one thing? Are you naturally this rude, or do they teach you to be this rude? And he goes, believe it or not, they teach us to be this rude. I said, so what's the point behind it? He said, watch this. And he goes, I'm going to be kind. He goes, and watch. And I was in the line that he was dealing with. He started being nice and the line stopped moving. He started being rude again. Oh man, it picked up pace and it started moving really fast. He looked, he goes, which one do you want? And I said, you can be rude, that's fine. I don't want to stand here all day. And he goes, well, it's really not rude. You have to tell people what you need them to do, and you have to be very direct about it. He said, and you got to remember, not everybody realizes that sometimes you go to check in and they want you to take your stuff out of your bag. Take your iPads, your computers, CPAP machines, a lot of those go through. If you're in this line, you don't take anything out of your bag. This line, you take your shoes off. This line, you don't. And it gets confusing because you don't know which line you're going through until you're up at the front. So they're yelling at you, telling you what to do, and you're actually kind of thankful for it, because if they didn't do it, you'd be doing all kinds of stuff that's wrong. And of course, they don't want you doing that. So I should say bold speaking, even though it feels pretty rude at 5 o'clock in the morning. And there's a lot of people, you know, I feel sorry for the people that come into the United States that can't speak English and they're yelling English at them, because I told the guy, I said, I don't think, from my experience, when I go to countries that can't speak English, they can yell at me all they want to in their language and it's still not going to help me. I got to hear it in my language. But you know, it is what it is. But going back into this, once again, it says it might be harmless, talking about these things that are laying around, but it might also be something more. If you see a suspicious package or bag that appears to have been abandoned, do not ignore it. And that's one thing, you know, in an airport or in a busy, busy shopping center, you see these parades. Boston Marathon is probably the most popular here in the United States. It comes to memory. These things were left and explosions. And these things were not done, you know, and David talked about this, and William briefly talked about it, and I know Katanis talked about it too. You know, these things were done, you know, by people that lived in America. We don't necessarily need other people to do these things. Here in America, we can do these things ourselves. And of course, other countries are very capable of doing it to themselves. So we want to make sure we don't, you know, kind of predetermine in our mind, well, if it was a bomb, it had to be these people. It had to be a Middle Eastern person. If that bomb went off, it had to be. Because we do a disservice to ourselves by presetting an ideology in our mind that these people are always going to do this or these people are always going to do that. You know, we have to be very careful how we do it, because we can actually do that with people in our own communities. And we really should consider how we do these things, and if we should really be brought into caution or not. I know there's a lot of religious organizations since COVID, even before COVID, they scan people when they come through the door. It's pretty common practice. They scan people, they scan their bags, they'll scan the people. When you go into a prison facility, you're going to get scanned, you're going to get searched, you're going to get scanned. You know, and these are reasons nothing suspicious should enter those areas. And if, you know, I always tell people, you know, because I've been scanned many times before too, never get offended if you're scanned. That's actually part of trying to keep you and everyone else in the facility safe. You know, so it should be part you participating, willingly participating. You know, it keeps you safe and it keeps everyone else safe too. You know, and if you see a bag or something that looks suspicious, you know, report it. Don't go pick it up. Don't go do things to it. Report it. Notice it says, get away and tell someone in authority. Your action could save your life and the lives of many others. Here it says, read the following article about terrorism in Spain. And of course, this is Madrid, and Madrid is still in chaos. If you look up what's going on in Madrid, it seems like they've had never-ending protests, and they're still protesting over there to this day. And it says, on Thursday, the 11th of March, 2004, over 200 people were killed and approximately 1,500 people injured in Madrid, Spain, when a total of 10 bombs, nearly all in backpacks, exploded during morning rush hour. The series of explosions hit 3 train stations along 9 miles of the commuter lines running from Santa Eugene to Otaka. Terrorists packed approximately 22 pounds of explosive into several backpacks and placed them on 4 different trains. Investigators believe the bombs were detonated by mobile phone. The trains were packed with commuters, office workers, students, and school children. So you think about this. Here you have innocent people going in, and here's someone that's preparing this. You know, a lot of thought goes into this. Then they take it and they carry it out, and here they're killing people for what reason? You know, what reason could they have possible other than they're trying to put fear into communities? You know, we see this in nations all around the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be a backpack like we're talking about now. Any form of force, you know, whether it be what we see taking place down in Mexico, what we see taking place in Ecuador, what we see taking place in Sudan, in southern Sudan, or Somalia. You know, there's nations where they're hacking people to death with machetes. You know, these wars that are taking place that are needless. You know, no one wins in these things. You know, you see all of these things taking place, and it's all the same mentality, whether it's a bomb that is placed into a train to kill innocent people, whether it's people that are killed in shootings taking place, political causes, whether it's people being hacked to death because of arguments over land or oil. You know, all of these things are acts of terrorism, and that's what we're trying to make sure that everyone understands. You know, what makes it different if you put a 22-pound bomb on a train and you detonate it and kill innocent people? What's the difference between that and dropping a 5,000-pound bomb on Gaza and killing innocent people? What's the difference? Really, when you look at it and examine it, you know, or if you drop a bomb on Iraq, or if you drop a bomb in Yemen, wherever you drop a bomb in Damascus, Syria, did it kill the guilty people? You know, you can find out you could possibly annihilate a city. For what reason? You know, there's really no reason for it other than hate. Hate, you know, uncontrolled hate leads to death, and it always will. You know, turning over to the next page, we're going to get into from the terrorism. Oh, well, first let's do the critical thinking. I didn't finish that. Here at the critical thinking, it said, how do you think incidents may affect the people of Madrid, Spain? And of course, have the students explain their answer. And once again, have them really think about how it would affect them if this took place, you know, at a mall or a shopping center. Some people live around commuter trains. If you get into places like New York or Chicago, you know, where they have commuter trains there. I know in Cleveland they have certain things. We have peaceful solution instructors from there that's talked to me about it. The bigger cities, San Francisco, so forth. But if not, you know, talk to them about what you have that would bring them into this as innocent people. You know, I remember growing up, a place that I go a lot now, never thought I would go there, but I remember growing up on the news watching school children get blown up because of cartel in Colombia. And a very popular person, he's very popular there now. It seemed like he was a bad guy in the 90s. He's like a hero now. Pablo Escobar. And I remember watching on the evening news these bombs blowing up in the 1990s. You know, planes blowing up, school children getting blown up, and these things were just put everywhere. And it was to put fear into the people to get them to comply. And that's what everything was done. But we see that today. Why do we drop bombs on nations? Not dropping. If you ever notice, the governments make the decisions, and I am not I am not for saying start hurting government officials. I'm not for that at all. But if two governments are arguing, and it's really the leaders that are really at the confrontation, why do you never see the leaders bombed? Why is it always the civilians that are bombed? Because you oppress the civilians, like Kissinger said, if you control the food, you control the people. But if they want a world leader removed, you oppress the people as hard as you can, they'll have the leader removed. And that's what it's always done. It's always a pressure. Sometimes you see world leaders die, but not that it was an intentional death, through accidental, like the president of Iran. But sometimes you see people slaughtered, like Muammar Gaddafi, that you can still watch to this day, where he was slaughtered. Or you see people hung, like Saddam Hussein. But all of these things are done to put fear into the people. Well, what's the reason for it? And what's the success that we expect to come from this? Once again, I would recommend all teachers, and I say this, and I've said it many times, other teachers have said it, the author of The Peaceful Solution really encouraged people to watch the documentary White Light, Black Rain, because it really shows the results. We see the explosions, of the bombs in Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You see the explosions, but very few people take time to see the results and see it in detail with the people that lived through it, and the fear and the begging of never let this take place again. And the author of The Peaceful Solution spoke at the UN, and he said there were a lot of people there from China or from Japan that lived through it, and that's what they were saying. Never again. Never let this take place again. There's one certain protester who I'm not for sure who runs her booth now. She's passed away since, Concepcion Picciato. And she's grandfathered claused in what she did. And of course, we used to meet with her all the time. She started protesting nuclear war back when Ronald Reagan was president, when you could protest right there in front of the National lawn, and then they moved her across the street. And every time we went to Washington, D.C., which was many times, she was always there, manning that little setup she had. And she would use, she had all kinds of literature that was put there. She had facts about nuclear war. She had a book called The Birth of a Nuclear Baby. All kinds of literature. And she really pushed it forward. Because she said she had a hard time speaking English, but she would tell you, this right here, this is the truth. We're going to see this stuff. And I don't know I know it's still operational, because I've seen the news and I see the booth still there, her little homemade booth that's in the park across the street now. And there were a lot of people that believed in her cause. And she believed in the cause of a lot of people who wrote about what's going to take place in the next nuclear war. And you see everybody talking about it, and it's one of those deals to where sometimes you start thinking to yourself, it's no longer if it's going to occur, but it feels like when is it going to occur? When you start seeing the news and you see this mentality and you see this posturing and this pushing and shoving, and a threat of a nuclear war is a form of terrorism. It's to put fear into the people. And that's something we all have to be mindful of. But going on here to page 148, we're going to get into talking about germ warfare. And it says, don't take your safety for granted. Be responsible. Be aware. And here with germ warfare, it says, believe it or not, terrorists can also wage war against innocent people with germs. They wage war against innocent people without germs. They do it with bombs, but they can also do it with germs. And I think the most heated debate right now, still to this day, is COVID. Was COVID a weaponized virus or was it not? I hear a lot of people talk about Wuhan, China, but if you go online and read, they were testing these and finding these things in the septic systems. That's how they do it. Even here in the state of Texas, if they want to know where an outbreak's at or how strong it is, they test the septic or the municipal sewage systems. And that's how they're doing it all across the United States. And I remember William was teaching a class, and he brought out an article that showed that it was first detected long before China in Rome. They detected it there in their systems, their sewage systems. And it's there on the news. Anybody can go online and see it. It's there for anybody to read. So obviously, kind of hard to do it in Wuhan, China, if it was already in the septic system somewhere else? And, how did it get there? Well, I'm not trying to say that China had anything to do with creating it. We as humans, how many times have we mutated COVID so far? What mutation are we on now? I've kind of lost track. The last one I heard was flirt or something like that. And I'm like, where do we come up with these names now? It's like hurricanes. You wonder who comes up with these names. But here with the germ warfare, believe it or not, these terrorists can wage war with innocent people with germs. Yes, that's right, germs. If someone intentionally releases germs or other biological substance into the air to make people sick, it is called germ warfare. And of course, we've seen how fast COVID spread, and there's a huge debate on whether it was or whether it wasn't, which kind of feels irrelevant, and you would think it wasn't, because scientists have come out and said that, we realized that COVID really didn't kill anybody. It's people had these elements before they got it, and the body couldn't sustain it. And there's even a lot of stuff coming out right now about vaccines and how probably wasn't a great idea to give everybody these things. And that's what they're saying. That's not my words. That's what they're saying. There's even companies that actually manufacture these that are being sued right now. So, my question, this is my question, I ponder, if the vaccine was worse than the virus, which one was germ warfare? Just to ponder a thought, there. Sometimes, because one thing that I did notice, this is my own recollection, is that a lot of people made money. A lot of people made money. And a lot of people still suffered and got sick. And here in the United States, we had 2 presidents that were vaccinated multiple times, and they both got the virus. And I know people that have never gotten it. I know people that chose not to be vaccinated. I've been to countries where they didn't give them an option. You got vaccinated. You could not buy anything in the store. You could not get in the store to buy food if you didn't get vaccinated. You couldn't go to work if you were not vaccinated. And that was pretty much mostly in South America. And they also tried to do that in countries like Uganda and Nigeria and Ghana. These people, they had a really hard time that were like, well, I'm kind of scared of this vaccine. I don't even know what it's going to do. I would rather wait to see what's going to take place with it. And if you waited, some people are like, man, I'm glad I didn't take that. Because there's a lot of people that had some side effects from it. And of course, with any kind of medication, you can read it. And I'm not trying to down the antibiotic, but it's always some kind of side effect from medication. It's just the way it is. Doctors will give you something that if you have allergies, you sneeze your head off and, it gives you a headache, but take this pill and you won't sneeze at all anymore. Could cause your kidneys to fail, your liver to burst, your eyes to go blind, could do everything else, but you won't sneeze anymore. And it's one of those deals where it's like, well, which one do I want to have? Do I want to have a failing liver or do I want to get rid of my allergies? Which one do I want to do? It's like, well, because when your liver goes bad, well, I need a pill for that now. What does it do? It makes you sneeze. Oh, okay, so I go back to sneezing. That's kind of a joke, but, I wonder if we could go to the first slide. Here's some interesting, now these are supposed to be facts. I would say there's a lot more to biological warfare when you talk about the microscopic level of things. There is a video you can watch on YouTube. I didn't take anything out of the video because it's a very long video. But it's called Germ Warfare, and it goes into the history of how in many early years, they would cut off people's legs to try to prevent disease, which they didn't need to do it. They would cut people and tried to bleed them out, which they didn't need to do it. They would drill holes in their head, which they didn't need to do it. All of these things, but the one thing they never comprehended was it was their actions that was spreading the disease. And everything they tried to do to alleviate it never worked because they didn't stop committing the action that caused them to get sick in the first place. And that's something we have to realize in society. If we do something that causes us to get sick, we probably should examine what we did. Now back to the slide. Sorry I left off on that. But it says one of the first recorded uses of biological warfare occurred in 1347 when Mongol forces reported to have catapulted plague-infested bodies over the walls into the Black Sea port of Kaffa, now Feodosia, Ukraine, At that time, a Genoese trade center in the Crimean Peninsula. And of course, Crimea is like big in the news right now. And of course, that Genoese, it's Italian. It's an Italian word. And of course, that was a trade center. And this was one of the first places. And this, of course, was reported, its own line, you can find it, was reported the 17th of May, 2024. And going on to the next slide, this goes to show how, people want to talk about COVID being an act of genetically engineered virus for weaponization. Well, the main news sources and even the World Health Organization, all of these people that are supposed to deal with these things, nobody classifies it as that. There's a lot of people that say that, but no one really classifies it. And here you see, this is supposed to be the largest attack in the United States, and it says soon after the terrorist attack of 9/11, letters laced with anthrax began appearing in the United States. 5 Americans were killed, and 17 were sickened in what became the worst biological attack in U.S. history. So for America, we have school shootings that, take more people than that out, that hurt people, kill people, and really harm society in general. That's not to belittle this, because people lost their life. And going on to the next slide, once again, this is from the World Health Organization. And it says, what is considered to be a bioweapon? And it says biological and toxic weapons are either microorganisms like viruses, bacteria or fungi, or toxic substance produced by living organisms that are produced and released deliberately to cause disease and death in humans, animals, or plants. So here you have something that you can't even see. We're kind of a society that's into nanotechnology, very small things that you need a microscope to see. But here, these are living organisms, and the way that these things are being done is they're being displaced in areas they shouldn't go. It's poisons that are being put in places that anthrax, as we'll read here in a minute, just a normal thing. Ricin is kind of a normal thing, but you can manipulate things to be very deadly. Well, you can do that with almost anything. Leave chicken out on the counter for 3 or 4 days and go back and eat it. That's pretty deadly too. If you can manage to swallow it, it's pretty deadly in itself. Or fish. Do that with fish. You can create something that's deadly. Very sickening. But going back here to your page here on page 148, it says if someone intentionally releases germs or other biological substance into the air to make people sick, it is called germ warfare. So once again, you're intentionally doing it to try to get an upper hand on your adversary, so to speak. It is also referred to as a biological attack. Some biological agents, such as anthrax, are not contagious and will not spread from one person to the next. When it is released into the air, it affects only those who breathe it in. On the other hand, other biological agents, such as the virus that causes smallpox and ricin, are very contagious and can spread from one person to the next by talking at close range, touching, coughing, or sneezing. And if we could put up the next slide about anthrax, and once again, this is from the World Health Organization, and it says anthrax is a rare and potentially fatal bacterial disease that is caused by the Bacillus anthracis bacteria. It's found naturally in the soil around the world and commonly affects livestock and wild animals, especially hooved animals like cows, sheep, goats, camels, and antelopes. Humans can get sick with anthrax if they come into contact with infected animals or contaminated animal product. So once again, think about this, because there's been on the news where herds of deer have died and they've traced it back to anthrax. It says this can happen through breathing in anthrax spores, eating food, or drinking water contaminated with spores, or getting spores in a cut or scrape in the skin. And, not to gross you out, but I want to show you some pictures of what, once again, from the World Health Organization, pictures here of what it looks like when anthrax gets into a scrape on your hand or a cut on your hand, and shows just how nasty it can be. If we can go to the next slide. There we go. So that's what it looks like when anthrax gets on the hand. And what, now think about this. This is microorganisms, something so small we can't see it, and it's been displaced on an area that it shouldn't be. And this is the result of taking something and putting it somewhere where it shouldn't be. This is the results of it. And if you remember when we went back and we taught in the self-control unit, we talked about many things you can take and put in places where they shouldn't be, and you get negative results. Because when you first see that on the hand, that's anthrax. But if you've ever dealt with someone who's had cancer, that's exactly what a body looks like when cancer comes through the skin. And if you've ever dealt with people that have cancer, it's very common for the body to open up, and that's what comes through. And it looks like black jelly or tar, you know, when cancer starts getting to the latter stages. In the beginning, it just pale pink, you know, but that's it literally looks a lot like cancer, but this is anthrax. And then, of course, next, you know, it talked about how you inhale these things, and you see here, it's this image of a man with his lungs here, and you're looking at him, looks like from the back. And it says, you know, the anthrax spores are inhaled, and you see where they're going through the nose, going down into the lungs, and you see the toxins there. That's the red color on the, you know, the right-hand side. And it says anthrax spores enter the lungs and travel into air-containing spaces. And if you've ever seen lungs before, when we were in school in North Carolina, it was pretty common in biology class, they would bring in lungs from people that were smokers. And they would show us the lungs of what somebody looked like that smoked. And, of course, didn't really think about, it had to come out of a dead body, you know. That sure wasn't a living person that just donated their lungs. But then they would also bring in a lung from someone that was healthy, probably died of something other than, you know, not smoking, not having, as they say today, COPD, which no one said anything about that, was usually lung cancer. And they would show us the lungs and the difference in between them. And at first it was really odd to see, knowing that these lungs are in somebody. First of all, they're a lot smaller than what I ever imagined. And secondly, my mind always imagined that the lungs were just this big open thing, that it filled it full of air and then it went down. But when you look into the lungs, they're just little small packets, air pockets everywhere. And they work together in unison. And when you get pneumonia or certain things like that, they'll start, you know, you'll start removing the full effectiveness of your lung. Well, that's what these spores do when they get into our lungs. And here you see the third step is spores are transported through the lymph system to glands that lie between the sternum and the spinal column. You know, and the author of The Peaceful Solution used to talk about how many diseases that scientists have brought out that hibernate and lay on the spinal column. It is amazing how many viruses will actually lie dormant on the spinal column, and then they will, sooner or later in life, they activate themselves to start doing what they want to do. But we're talking about these small, you know, if you can imagine kingdoms, you know, I think the best example, and I don't like bringing this movie up, but I remember seeing the end of this movie. It was another teacher that was telling me about it, and I went on YouTube to pull off the ending of it, and it is a great example. And it was a Men in Black movie, to where they were talking about how small this little village of people they took out of this locker, and how hard it must have been on that little village. And then they open up a door, and lo and behold, the earth is in a little locker compared to the universe. And it's kind of like those kingdoms that are in our body, those microscopic kingdoms. Trillions and trillions of these things are in our bodies, and each one has its kingdom, so to speak, or its area it's supposed to go. Well, when things like anthrax get into the body, you know, this is poison. It's like drinking gasoline or something. You're putting something that is extremely deadly into an area that it should not be. And of course, the result is severe sickness and death. Now, we're talking about people intentionally doing this to someone. Literally doing this as an act of war. Now, I'm sure only the guilty people get it, right? Well, who determines who's guilty? It's very hard. It's like bombs. They just don't hurt who they say is guilty. They hurt everyone. If you look to the next, this is actually put out by the World Health Organization, and they said this is anthrax on the hand. And if you look at that, that looks like one of the most severe burns or infections or whatever you want to call it. It looks a lot like other diseases that go around in the body that can really ravage the body. But one thing that looks extremely painful. There's no love, care, concern, or compassion to do someone this way. And once again, we talk about this germ warfare. It's to get the upper hand, and it's intentionally done to someone. And when you think about the intentions of harming, hurting, annihilating countries, well, once again, I emphasize, just like the author of The Peaceful Solution, take time with your students when you go through this section and see the testimonies of the people that suffered in Japan. And you would think that we would say, we've seen what took place, we never want to do it again. Well, even Japan has started leaving that mindset now, because that generation is pretty much dying off. And now even Japan is wanting to go back and try to get involved where, we're going to need something to keep us safe too. Well, if everybody has a bullet and if everybody's shooting, how many people that are innocent bystanders get the bullet? And when you go through these things, I encourage teachers to also look up a study called the TAPS report. And that is a report with senators and scientists that got together from Edward Kennedy and so on, that actually shows how when a nuclear bomb is dropped on one country, due to the current of wind that takes place on our earth, many, many people are going to suffer. You can have whole continents like South America that have no nuclear weapons. They're going to get the same thing that other countries get because the wind current's going to carry it. There's going to be a lot of things that go wrong for countries that don't even have these weapons. So if you think, well, I know Russia and the United States and China are always talking about this, and Israel's always talking about it, and Pakistan and India, those are countries, we don't have them. When they start dropping these things, we're all going to be affected. Doesn't matter where you live, and if you think it won't take place, find a place where they didn't get COVID. It went all the way to Antarctica. I remember a lady that they showed in the news that she was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she had an immune deficiency, and she locked herself in her apartment, did not leave her apartment, had no contact with anyone except delivery packages from a delivery company, and they left them outside the door. She still got COVID. And as the author said about this COVID that come out, some things you can't run and hide from. They track you down, these microscopic organisms. And that's the same thing when they get into germ warfare. Well, we kind of define it as anthrax and ricin and other things, but there's a lot of things that are done to intentionally hurt other people. And think about that, because that carries out to a larger spectrum. But of course, we're talking about, this is what they consider military grade weaponry right here. But it also talked about ricin, and going to the next slide, and this is just to get into the mind, because these are things that they're more common than we think they are. And it says ricin is a toxic protein found naturally in castor bean that can be used as a poison. It can be extracted from the beans and made into a liquid, powder, or crystal. Ricin is toxic when inhaled, ingested, or injected, and as little as 5 to 10 microorganisms per kilogram can be lethal. Sounds almost as deadly as fentanyl, doesn't it? Which fentanyl's all over the place. That's something you don't have a problem finding. And once again, that was in the news. How many Americans is it killing? And there's senators right now wanting to label that as warfare, chemical warfare, because they say that it's killing people. Not biological, because it's not a virus, it's more of a chemical. And then before we move on, the very next slide, it says, what are the examples of germ warfare in the 1900s? Notice here it says modern time biological warfare reached sophistication during the 1990s. Pretty much in our generation, we've seen these things take place. During World War I, the German army developed anthrax, glanders, cholera, and a wheat fungus specifically for the use of biological weapons. When you think about cholera, that's kind of become a normal thing over in the Middle East and third world countries where the water gets infected. And, one of the leading causes of death in Africa is diarrhea. In America, that sounds a little strange. But when you're in a country that has contaminated water, and when you have diarrhea, it dehydrates you. You're pushing it all out. Well, if all you have is contaminated water, how are you going to fix it? Drinking more of the same thing that made you sick is not going to help you. And it's the third leading cause of death in Africa, at least it was last year. And it's in Yemen, I think it was like the second leading cause of death because they were constantly having these situations due to war. So you think about how these things, you don't have to actually put it into the community. You can do things that cause it to take effect in the community. And it harms others. It affects others. But going back here to page 148, it says biological attacks are not as easy to recognize as explosions. People could suddenly become sick and friends and family members would not know why. Health officials might not realize that germs or other harmful substances have been released into the air until many people exhibit the same symptoms. Once it is determined that there has been a biological attack in an area, now I want you to think about how long it would take to determine this and to actually narrow down what it is. We're not talking about one person gets sick, oh, we got it. Now we know what it is. We're talking about a lot of casualties before this starts showing. But once it is determined that there has been a biological attack in an area, there might be emergency news bulletins or health officials that might make telephone calls to people in specific areas warning them of health risks and what symptoms to look for. And if you're looking at what even Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's retired now, so he speaks more freely, what he says about when they were in the midst of COVID, he openly says now that 90% of what he said was just a guess, that they really had no scientific foundational proof of it. It was just a guess. But he said he made the best educated guess he could make with what he had at the time. And, of course, everything that took place was just a guess. And there was a lot of guessing going on, and a lot of guessing going on through needles and through masks and, even the 6 foot distancing. I watched here not long ago where he said, well, we didn't know if that would work or not, but that was the thing we went with. We didn't know if masks work or not, but that was what we went with. And now they're coming out and saying there's some people, they didn't wear masks. They just went their way, and there's something in their genetic makeup that COVID just cannot attach itself to. And that there's some people who they wore masks, they got vaccinated once, twice, 3 times. They did everything they're supposed to do, and they still got it. So it's a very difficult and tricky thing to try to decipher. Very difficult to understand without getting all the facts to how these things work. And they're still trying to gather the facts. And they're still trying to figure out how do people get long-term COVID, and how do people suffer this long? How did they suffer this long? But they kind of generalized that if you get it, it's going to last you 5 months is pretty much what they said. That's about how long you're going to suffer from it unless you get it again, if you get a mutation, which a lot of people have had it many times. But continuing on here, it says, until health officials determine what type of biological agent was released, they might be unable to provide information on what should be done to alleviate the symptoms. In the meantime, be sure to listen to the news so that more information is brought out. You will be able to help yourself and your family. So once again, and a lot of these things are going to be educated guesses. That's what scientists do. They theorize. They have theories, and they do. I'm not not trying to put them down. They do their very best with the knowledge they have in trying to give the best advice in a circumstantial situation. And sometimes gathering all the facts, a lot of people die when you're trying to get the facts. A lot of people can die when you're trying to save people. If you look at if you look at things, we're talking about germ warfare, but look at how much money was spent on COVID, and COVID is something that I think it's been pretty much proven it wasn't created in Wuhan, China. It was before Wuhan, China. That's very easy to see. But there's other things that I want you to think about. How easy is it to stop an attack of something you don't know about? You have no clue to what it is. You don't know the makeup of it. You just know people are dying. But yet, how long have we been trying to stop cancer, heart disease, all of these other diseases people are dying from? We've been trying to stop those for how long? And there's still, millions of people dying from these things. So you can only imagine how difficult it is to try to figure out what was done, because it's not like if this country is going to declare germ warfare in this country, they don't send you a newsletter telling you what they just did to you. They're not going to give you a heads up and go, oh, this is what we're doing, just so you know. No, you figure it out. Because our whole point is to put fear into the people that vote you into office. That's what we're looking to do. We're looking to put fear in people. Well, that's terrorism. Going on to page 149, it says, the news can tell you the signs and symptoms of infection, the geographic area that has been affected. And there's a lot of movies that have come out over the years showing these things. The infections where they shut down towns, they shut down cities. There's a lot of movies, even older movies. I think one of the oldest ones I've seen that was really interesting is called The Day After. And it's a very interesting movie to watch. And I say movie, it's educational, what I'm saying to watch, not for entertainment purpose, but for educational purpose. Because, you think about, I was just talking with another Peaceful Solution instructor the other day about a film that I seen on a plane ride. It was a documentary about a soccer team that crashed in the mountains. Few survived, and nobody had found them. They were in a desperate area, so they started eating each other. And of course you can imagine once you start eating each other, well, people are going to voluntarily, I'll go get help right now. Don't worry about me. I'll go find help. Well, I would want to be away from people that were eating each other too. But they showed they cared by, well, we'll take your leg first, your leg next, and then we'll walk through the legs, and then we'll go through the arms. If you write with your right hand, we'll take your left arm. So they tried to say, well, we did it compassionately. But it was a horrific thing. And I remember on the movie The Day After, it showed people, they didn't have any food to eat because of radiation in the animals. They started eating each other. And you start thinking about, here in the United States, think about what took place with COVID when the stores were empty. People bought toilet paper for no reason whatsoever. They would just go in and, oh, there's no toilet paper. What am I going to do? And they would have 100 rolls at home just for the fact the shelf was empty, and you could tell which foods people could not stand because that was the only thing left on the shelf. And I started realizing, because there's only certain foods I can eat in my kind of diet that I have. And I started realizing every food I can eat still on the shelf. Nobody likes that stuff. That's what's left. So I'm like, oh well, at least they left something for me. But, it's one of those deals to where you start wondering, well, why are people so sick? What are they eating? That could have a lot to do with it too. We don't need to blame everybody else. But anyway, here on page 149, it says, in the event that you're in an area that has been contaminated by a biological agent, the first thing you should notice, is get away from the area as quickly as possible. Be sure to cover your mouth and nose with several layers of fabric, such as a towel folded several times, a jacket or t-shirt. This will act as a filter. I know President Bill Clinton had advised everybody at one time in the United States they need to get a mask. And you can get a gas mask that also, you can get filters on those masks that actually will help, protect you from a biological attack. Now, that was advice given by the President of the United States at the time. And even President Obama, he said how he agreed with that when he was in office. But these are things that I would dare say most Americans, and I'm just speaking of Americans, we wouldn't have, we proved it with COVID that we If we go in and the store is not completely full, even we're not even going to buy 99% of the stuff in the store, Americans, they just freak out. Why? Well, there's nothing to buy. Well, what do you want? That right there, but there's nothing to buy. You know, we're not used to seeing things like that. You know, it's kind of like things that aren't normal can really affect our minds. And someone told me about an example the other day, and they said it's like if you can't swim and you wear a life jacket, and if you jump into deep water and your feet can't touch, even though the life jacket's going to hold you up, some people will mentally freak out because they know they can't swim and their feet's not touching anything. Even though they're not sinking, it mentally bothers them. You know, and these things take place. I've even seen situations where people who can swim in swimming pools can jump in lakes that are 60 foot deep, and it mentally shuts them down, where just can't do it. You know, and that's not germ warfare, but germ warfare is the same thing. If you don't practice and get a plan into action of what you need to do when the time comes, people are just going to freak out. That's what they're going to do. And they're going to do whatever serves them their best purpose. It's not every man for themselves, as they say. Well, continuing on, it says, then, once you get away from the area, it says, as soon as you are able, put the clothes you are wearing into a plastic bag and tie the bag tightly. Then shower. Notice this is important. Wash your body from head to toe with soap. Wash and rinse completely at least 3 times to be sure that there is no residue of the biological agent left on your skin or hair. And if you've ever been through training for this, specifically you start from your head and go down. You don't bring anything back up. You want it away from this area right here. Kind of the most important area when you're alive. You know, so you want to make sure everything goes down. Like washing a car, you know, you're supposed to start, rinsing off top and let it go down. That's the same way, especially even if you don't think you have something, but you have to wash off, you want to make sure you do it properly. And it says, contact the authorities, tell them what occurred, when it occurred, and why you are suspicious of an attack. Well, obviously, if it's on the news and you have these things going on, there's going to be a lot going on. And if you think you can get a phone call in at that time, you might want to have your own plan going on what you're going to do. Listen to the news on TV or radio for official information on what the signs and symptoms of the disease are, what biological agent was released, and where you can seek help if necessary. You know, so you think about all of these things that can take place in our society, and the most important part, as we're reading this, I'm sure there's a lot of people thinking that it just don't seem like something that could take place. But it is a reality that nations are developing. They're not developing as in the stages of working on it. They're already developed. Because there was, if you can skip the next slide and go into the last slide, it's entitled, When Was Biological Warfare Banned? Notice it says the Biological Weapons Convention, known as the BWC, which effectively prohibits biological toxic weapons, was opened for signature on April 10th of 1972 and entered into force on 26th of March 1975. Now, if you think they're adhering to that agreement, go read their nuclear agreements that they have and they break continually. You have all of these. It's amazing when you see how many nuclear bombs nations have. All it takes is a handful to destroy a huge part of a country, but we're talking thousands. It's like the fly I had up here, flying around. It's kind of like if I go get something this big and I electrify it and put flames in it just to swat the fly. That's what these nuclear bombs are capable of, and it makes no sense. But it also makes no sense to develop and house these biological and this germ warfare to annihilate others, to put fear into citizens, and to take by force. Because that's what we see taking place in society. And ask yourself, how can any of these things bring peace? How can someone dying a horrible death, how can that cause someone else who watches their families die, how can that cause someone to go, I really should be friends with that country? They got their best interest out, for me. They're really looking for me and they really want to make friends. You don't make friends by annihilating people's families and their culture. You make friends by learning to create a society, a body of rules that's already there. We don't have to create anything. We just need to go by them. And make sure we don't do anything that brings harm against ourselves, someone else, or the environment. That's much easier said than done, but that is the very basic concept of what we're talking about. We're going to stop right here. William will pick up the next class, and I'm sure he'll have a lot more to say about this germ warfare as he gets into emergency and what can be done for emergencies. But this germ warfare, it's a huge, especially in today's society, it's a huge topic. And it's a realistic topic, just as realistic as nuclear weapons. As many senators say, it's no longer a topic of if it can take place, it's when it can take place. So, watch these things, pay attention, look out for them, and realize it's better to have a plan than not need it, than have no plan at all. So our next class is going to be July 3rd at 5:30, and William will be joining us, so we look forward to seeing all of you once again. Thank you very much.